efficiency, I was thinking, it's one of, we all say it's not sexy. Anybody who works in energy efficiency laments that it's not sexy, and I think that's partly because it's like the absence of something. There's a void, and that's the whole point. And so it's kind of this, there's some abstractions with it that when you get really into the weeds, it's very, very interesting. But at a high level, it's hard to find the hook, which is part of what the problem is. It's been really hard to achieve energy efficiency goals. So we'll try to strike a balance here. Just out of curiosity, who's in the room who feels like they are an expert in energy efficiency? Ross, raise your hand. Okay, and who's here out of more general interest and curiosity? Okay, good to know. So energy efficiency, my experience, I'm Betony Jones. I do research and consulting on workforce strategies to reduce greenhouse gases. I work mostly in California. I was with the UC Berkeley Labor Center for 5 years. And energy efficiency was a really big priority of our research and working to address workforce issues within the investor-owned utility programs. So that's some of the perspective that I bring. But we have a nice panel here of people from all over the country and even Canada working on energy efficiency. So the discussion will not be isolated to California. So the format for this panel is I'll make
Good afternoon.
I'll make it. Let's just see what's happening over there.
They got a mic in you.
Maybe they're attached.
Yeah. Maybe we could just turn this on.
Based on the organization that I work for, a Roberts institution focused on clean energy and climate policy. Primarily focused on state.
Another one here. Have any AV function or? I think it's both. It's a plug from the wall? No, that's not.
I actually could have orchestrated this because this example really highlights the issue here. When equipment is not installed and operated with code and with skill, it doesn't function as intended. So energy efficiency, key strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Because when you reduce energy use in buildings and other processes, you need fewer power plants, fewer transmission lines, ultimately less electricity needs to be generated, and fewer fossil fuels need to be burned in that process. So it's an important greenhouse gas reduction strategy. It's also a win-win-win, where it saves money for the energy that you're not using or paying for. It reduces emissions, and it requires skilled on-site workers. Like it really, you have to make an investment in, I think here we're just talking about buildings, so make an investment in buildings that work as on-site, usually at least some of it. And so those are jobs that can't be outsourced, and it also usually requires skill. So it's this real kind of, there's this real natural alignment between business, environmental interests, and labor. And in some ways, in that way, energy efficiency is sort of the low-hanging fruit in terms of engaging labor in climate policy, but it hasn't really always been that easy. Partly because we don't always have the institutions or frameworks that support that engagement of skilled workers and labor union members in that work. So the only way that energy efficiency actually helps address climate change is if equipment is installed, operated, commissioned, maintained correctly. Because if it isn't, you have things like your sensor, your occupancy sensor in a room is not in the right spot, and the lights go off when you want them to stay on, and they stay on when you want them to go off, and people override the system, and those nice, fancy, advanced lighting controls aren't actually saving the energy you thought they were saving. And the same in HVAC, and the same in all these sectors. And in fact, as energy efficiency opportunities get more complex, like we're not really talking about screwing in light bulbs anymore, that skill matters more and more, and will matter more and more. So if we want to achieve the greenhouse gas benefits of efficiency, the skill of the workforce is really important to that. One thing that makes it challenging is, like I said, energy efficiency is sort of invisible. So when you have a market where the work quality isn't super visible, and consumers can't really evaluate that quality, and there's no standards to ensure, no labor standards to ensure that qualified contractors and workers are doing that work, you get a market where the low cost is sort of the competitive driver in that industry. And when you have that, then you don't have the situation set up that to really engage skilled workers, because there's no return on any investment that workers or their employers have made in training. So the system is not automatically set up, and in fact there's real challenges toward valuing the skill of the workforce at the level it needs to be valued in order to really achieve the savings that we want to get. And so what we have is this persistent gap. This is true in California, but I think it's also true elsewhere based on like a very, very robust body of literature, that the savings we think we're getting on paper from all the engineering estimates and whatnot are not the savings that actualize. And part of that gap might be to do with the equipment not being designed or not operating as designed, but part of that gap might have to do with the way that it's installed and having no mechanism to evaluate installation quality or set standards that are going to engage a skilled and trained workforce. And so we kind of, the more we continue to sort of ignore the workforce issues, the actual work involved in energy efficiency and making it happen, the more that gap will persist and probably grow. And so addressing workforce issues and engaging skilled workers in energy efficiency is really important to allowing energy efficiency to achieve the greenhouse gas goals that we want it to. So there's been research on HVAC in California, just to give you some numbers about how bad it is. Poor quality installation of HVAC systems result in 20 to 40% increase in energy use. So installation quality matters a lot, and this extends beyond HVAC. And poor quality installation is not a rare occurrence. The California Energy Commission found that up to 85% of replacement HVAC systems are installed incorrectly. 85%. So this means that the energy efficiency that we are using public money or ratepayer money to subsidize, we're not getting what we're paying for because those systems are not installed correctly. This is not a training issue, because at the same time that these HVAC systems aren't getting installed correctly, there are thousands of highly skilled and trained HVAC workers in California who've gone through apprenticeship. But there's no reason for them to go after these incentives because there's no bar. Everybody's forced to compete on low cost. So this is kind of why this is an important issue, why it's a complex issue. And these examples, a lot of energy efficiency work is in the construction industry, but as some of our panelists will talk about, it's not only the construction industry. You have teachers and nurses and janitors especially, and superintendents, people who really know buildings and can identify energy loss and reduce it. But again, like that needs to be folded into their job, and there needs to be some reason that you're going to ask people to look further. So there's lots of fields that could be affected by the energy efficiency sector, and I'm excited to hear from some of our panelists on the work that they're doing to engage workers and try to address some of these regulatory barriers and do some of the organizing to engage workers in efficiency. And we're just going to go down the line, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, then they'll provide some comments. We'll have a few, I have a few discussion questions prepared, and then we really want to open it up to questions from you guys.
So good afternoon. My name is John Cartwright. I'm the president of the Toronto and York Regional Labour Council. I'm a carpenter by trade, started my trade at the age of 18. For 10 years I was elected as a rep with Carpenters Local 27, the largest local in Canada. And for 10 years I headed the Toronto Building Trades Council during the worst recession since the German Theaters. That was in the early 1990s. And then for the last period of time I've been at the Central Labour Council, which represents about 208,000 women and men that work in every sector of the economy. In the construction, I'm going to talk a little bit about some history. And I'm going to preface it by saying, have you all heard Rich Trumka's address? From everything I understand, he could never have made that speech 4 years ago. And it was a profoundly important presentation. And I looked at the resolution that was passed at the FLCIO a year ago, and it's an interesting resolution. In Canada, we were one of the first central labour bodies to pass a major green jobs strategy program in 1999, unanimously endorsed with construction workers, with steel workers, with forestry workers, with pulp and paper, auto workers in the room, unanimous endorsement of a very ambitious green job strategy. And the story I'm about to tell you is a piece of why we were able to do that long ago. So I ended up taking over the building trades in 1991 as we were moving into the worst recessions in the 30s. Not a single high-rise commercial building was being built east of the Rockies in all of Canada. Our unemployment level was 35%, people losing homes, families, suicides, all of that stuff. People were desperate for a job. Any job. Some of our folks would have literally, paved over their grandmother's grave if it would have meant, an extra hour's work. And we were struggling. We were trying to move the government of the day to invest in things like transit, but money was tight in the recession as well. And then one day I was at a conference, and an engineer stood up, and he was talking about his particular company that had 200 employees. It was the only engineering or architecture firm in all of Ontario that hadn't shed half of its workforce with this recession. And I was intrigued and went up and asked him how that worked. And he explained that he had created this niche market business around retrofitting the buildings that had been built when energy didn't matter. Energy costs were almost irrelevant, and they were all now energy pays. And he could go to building owners and offer them to do a retrofit. He would find the financing. They wouldn't pay a penny, except he would take the savings of energy costs for whatever was calculated based on an audit of the building, 3.12 years or 4.2 years or whatever it was, and then he'd walk away. He would be paid back, and the building owner would have a dramatic lower cost. We took that idea first to our leadership of the building trades business, and everybody said, hey, there's nothing else we see, so go for that. Let's see if we can work on it. And we then moved to our city council and worked with some of our city councilors to create a city-run partnership called the Better Buildings Partnership, where the city mandated a program that would go into all the building owners, offer them an initial audit for free by city staff, give a stamp of approval that this was real, not a scam, because of course somebody comes and says, I'm going to give you something for nothing. People always assume there's something wrong with that picture. And popularize the program. That became part of the financing of that was simply $12 million set aside from an infrastructure program to securitize loans to be able to bring the carrying costs of those retrofits down dramatically. And that Better Buildings Partnership, which was formally started in 1995, has now since then created 46,000 person years worth of work. That's the equivalent of like 10 or 15 mega projects that in the construction industry is what we live and die for. It created a whole lot of people who were cynical and not sure at the start of whether or not this made any sense, or was this just a couple of guys that want to go off and hug trees and crunch granola while real people had to get a real job, into believers. And because we were able to show that we could actually take jobs and the environment and turn them into thousands of jobs for some of the most redneck guys you ever want to meet and a few gals, that helped us be able to tell the story in our broader labor movement and work with people who were working under sectors to win a big conversation in the labor movement back in 1999. It also allowed our unions to start thinking carefully about advocacy. The skills that we have can build anything. Anybody gives us a blueprint, we can build it. We can build a piece of shit that paves over farmland that's needed for food, or has destructive transit or commute outlines, or we can build green buildings, low, almost net zero carbon buildings today. We can build those. We can build them in compact urban forms. We can do all that. And what we came to understand is, why wouldn't we advocate for doing the right thing instead of going along with the employers and the developers and others just saying, come and lobby for us on this schlock that we want to do that's actually going to be harmful to the planet. So our unions undertook a whole series of upgrading and trainings, and Lee Loftus is here from the Insulators in Canada, and their union has really stepped up and driven an agenda within their training program to say we want to be able to build green buildings, and we want to be able to have low carbon. And then you come to the question of, where does that go from there? So 2 quick thoughts. One is, we didn't want these big initiatives to only benefit the people traditionally being part of the unions that look like me. We wanted to make sure my city, half of us are born outside of Canada, half of us are people of color. We wanted to make sure that we build a program that had equity at its core as well as sustainability. And then, so we created a community benefits program that we actually came down to Los Angeles and stole some ideas for that as we were doing retrofits and major pieces. And then I'm going to leave by saying we can build a wonderfully efficient building, but if the people running it don't have the skills to do it, then it ain't going to be the efficient building you need, and that's my segue over to my brothers to run.
My name is Mike Fishman, by the way, and I'm here today representing Climate Jobs New York. I retired 2 years ago from SEIU, and I've been doing consulting work and helping with some of my partners in New York. And we've been in the process of forming an organization that we call Climate Jobs New York that has 9 unions that have contributed $50,000 to start a program in the city to do exactly what this says, Climate Jobs New York, meaning climate action and good jobs. And it's what you all have been talking about in this morning's conversation about labor needs to lead on climate, but climate action needs to include jobs. So that's why I got here today, but I'm actually going to talk about what I used to do, which I used to run a union in New York City, 32BJ, which is the SEIU Building Service Union, the partner to Aida's union. We had 120,000 members in New York City and the surrounding states. And we have 40,000 members in the residential sector. And since we have a small group, I'm going to pass these around and you can take a look at them. If I can steal that one there. So, the people in our union take care of the buildings. And to understand our union, you have to understand New York. Anybody here from New York? Okay. You ever hear of the doormen?
Yeah.
In New York? Well, the doormen are part of our union. And as you know, in New York, the doormen are a special breed of people. They take care of the tenants in the building. They take care of the building. But in the building, they're actually accompanied by cleaners, handymen, and what we call resident managers. And New York has a special law that says that if you are building 6 stories or larger, you have to have a superintendent, somebody who can take care of the building, within 500 feet, living within 500 feet. And what that means is every major building has somebody living inside the building who takes care of it. They're called the superintendents. And if it's a big building, where you have many tenants, many units, or many people working there. They call them the resident manager. And if you can imagine the resident manager job in New York City, it's about one of the best jobs you can have. You live in the building free. You get an apartment. Now they would all tell me I'm making it sound too easy, but you live in the building free. You get your apartment. You get all your utilities, and you run the staff, and you have to manage the whole building operation. And it's not just manage the building itself. You're managing the heating plant, the cooling system. You're managing the employees, and you're managing the relationship with the tenants. So if you can imagine that job, when I talk to them and say, that's a really good job, they say, yeah, but I'm on 24 hours a day, anybody can come to my home and talk to me, and if I lose my job, I lose my apartment. But they are the key in New York that makes New York work. And in 32BJ, our 40,000 members who work in those buildings work for those guys. And they really are mostly guys, but they are a pretty diverse group. They used to be just Irish, and now they're much more diverse. Our union, those 40,000 are about 65% immigrant, 45% Latino, 20% African American, and the rest are generally Eastern and Western European immigrants, so Irish, Albanian, heavy Irish and Albanian, Polish membership. So if you think about this, New York City, you have 400 million square feet of commercial buildings, and you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of apartment units and buildings. And these, about 3,000 guys, are the ones who are managing the residential sector. And they are responsible for how that building functions in every part of it. In New York, about 70% of the carbon emissions, because we have such a great transit system, come from the buildings. And so if you really want to tackle carbon emissions in New York City, you have to tackle it through the buildings. So our union, as big as we were, and are now, 160,000 now, somebody said in the other room about we need structures in order to have trust, and the guy from Norway was talking about trust. I actually think trust comes from power, and having equal power for workers and for the other parts of society. And so in New York City, our relationship with the employers, that is the people who employed those 3,000, 40,000 members and the commercial janitors, was based on whether we had enough power to have a real conversation with them, a civil conversation, and could have a social contract. And I would say for about 10 years, we had to have a fight with them to get to the point of trust. And once we had that trust, then we could do things that would actually improve the buildings and work on energy efficiency and talk about social compact for all our members. So about 2009, you remember right after the financial crisis, the government put together a program, Recovery Act, to give money to create jobs. And there were grants available to do energy efficiency work from the Department of Energy. And our union had an incredible training program, it still does. It's an $11 million a year program to train workers to run buildings and to manage buildings and to be handymen. So you can come into 32BJ as a brand new, non-English speaking worker, learn English at our school, get trained as a handyman, and then become a superintendent. And then you can rise within the ranks of superintendents, and you really have a path to a real life where you have apartment, you can buy a home, you have a pension, you have health care for your family and your kids. So this training fund, which was $11 million, we decided we would apply for a grant and try to take on the issue of climate change. And to do that, we didn't start with the fund, we started with our members. I had a conversation with our local, all 120,000, through our membership meetings about climate change and why we needed to be involved. And got passed a resolution to work on energy efficiency. And then we went to our fund and said, we need to set up a course to train our members. And called the Green Supers Program. Keep passing this around. And as you can see, this is actually a physical plant in a building. That's more a commercial building, but in residential, you have a big heating and cooling system. And we brought the guys in and we talked to them about energy efficiency. And you'll see in here, we developed a 40-hour training program that included small things, windows, stop the air leaks, doors, put something under them, change the light bulbs to make them LEDs instead of incandescent, retrofit the heating system, put in new filters, change the filters regularly, little things and big things. And these guys went back and implemented in the building. And we're a union that is very focused on metrics. What are you measuring? How do you decide whether you were successful? We certainly decided in terms of our membership that if you got bigger, you were successful. If you were shrinking, you were actually not doing too well. And pretty much on this program, we said the same thing. Are we reducing the greenhouse emissions? So we benchmarked the greenhouse emissions. We actually had inspectors come in and inspect every building that was in the program, set a benchmark, and then a year later go back and check it again. And as you'll see in here, it was really an incredible program. Let's see, within the first year, 95% of the buildings did something on energy efficiency, like the light bulbs and stuff like that. 80% did operations and maintenance changes. And we had reductions of 5 to 20% in every building, which is enormous. If you figure 70% of the greenhouse emissions come from the buildings, a 5% change is enormous, 20% is really tremendous. So we have kept it going. My successor, who's there now, Hector Figueroa, is continuing the program. Aida was telling me that they're still meeting around the country on these issues in our division of SEIU, and it's been incredibly successful. And the owners would say we have made a difference in their building and their costs. And while we haven't seen, it's not like they save some money and all of a sudden it comes to the pocket of the worker. But here you have a worker who's making $50,000 or $60,000 a year with health care and pension, and they still have it in a time when everybody else is getting done. So I think it's been incredibly successful. The tenants would say they now go to the super or the resident manager to ask about questions of efficiency and help them change their water consumption or their lighting in their house. So it's been great. And with that, I'll pass it over to the smart guy.
Great, thank you. So hello everyone. My name is Dion Abril. I'm the executive administrator to the Western States Council of SMART, which is the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers. HVAC systems is what we pretty much advocate for. It's been a long time since sheet metal workers have always long advocated for and participated in the development of the building standards and workforce training for the installation of mechanical systems in order to safeguard the public health, achieve energy efficiency, and to ensure performance and durability of these systems. With the experience comes the perspective that the relationship between the energy efficiency and the workforce training must not be overlooked. So, the energy efficiency of heating and air conditioning equipment is highly dependent on the quality of their installations. So this is the reason why we continue to promote hiring companies who provide necessary training to ensure that the skilled and trained workforce, there is a skilled and trained workforce in the HVAC industry. Along with other building trade unions, the sheet metal workers have invested in these training programs through the development of the apprenticeship training program. These programs are approved and continuously reviewed by the California State through the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and they provide workers with experience, training, and a comprehensive systems knowledge needed to properly install HVAC systems. These programs combine extensive education from highly qualified instructors, as well as they provide years of hands-on experience. In contrast, the vast majority of non-union contractors do not invest in these training and also the retention of skilled and experienced workers. So inadequate programs that do not invest in training high-skilled workers within the communities that they serve will result in a race to the bottom. So instead of growing the pool for highly trained workers required to overcome the energy efficiency objectives, will reduce the ability to address these issues in the near future. So in California, if California is going to meet the aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals, then poor quality installations by unqualified workers needs to be addressed. As Betony said, this CEC study showed that there's poor quality installation of HVAC systems result in like a 20 to 40%, or actually 20-40% increase in the energy usage. Moreover, the quality of installation is pervasive through California, and the California Energy Commission found that 85% of the replacement of HVAC systems were installed incorrectly. This can be tied directly to the use of untrained, underpaid workers who have not gone through an apprenticeship program. Even the public utilities reports have found that the majority of HVAC installers have little to no training, resulting in a high failure rate of even routine tasks. Although the sheet metal workers do advocate for adopting more stringent standards and increasing energy efficiency incentives, we know that these alone will not be sufficient to meet California greenhouse gas reduction goals. So poor quality installation is widespread permit avoidance is undermining the state's energy efficiency goals as well. So this is why we participate in the State Energy Commission and the Public Utility Commission proceedings to advocate for policies to address these issues. So one solution is to attach the work standards to the energy efficiency subsidy program in California. So the state of California, in addition, in order to meet the Senate Bill 350 energy efficiency goals, California needs to take concrete steps to improve permit compliance. The California Energy Commission has estimated that 90% of the HVAC retrofit work does not comply with permit or inspection and or Title 24 compliance documentation requirements. So these contractors who are willing to work without a permit can perform contractors who are willing to work without a permit can perform faulty work and underbid competitors. Contractors that perform unpermitted work are more likely to be unlicensed, use low-wage, untrained workers, and more than likely to skip acceptance testing and commissioning of systems altogether. So if permits are not pulled, then the local building departments cannot enforce the Title 24 energy code standards, and union contractors can't compete. So to address these issues, as an HVAC sales registry needs to be developed so that we can ensure that when the HVAC systems are sold, the permits are pulled and Title 24 compliance documentation is completed. But in closing, as with adoption of the more stringent standards and increasing energy efficiency incentives, permit compliance is not sufficient on its own to ensure better installation outcomes. Accordingly, all of these strategies need to be aligned with workforce standards to ensure that when incentives are provided and permits are pulled, real energy savings results. So we need to create a system that rewards contractors for investing in skilled and trained workforce and supporting apprenticeship programs. We need to recognize that union workers to install HVAC systems needs greater energy efficiency savings and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So that
Aida Cardenas with Building Skills Partnership. And Building Skills Partnership is a nonprofit in the state of California, really born out of a labor management partnership between SEIU, United Service Workers West, and over 40 janitorial companies and a lot of building owners and client, we call our client companies throughout the state. I just want to recognize that we have Denise. So Denise is our vice president here representing in Northern California, but our vice president statewide of the local. And so I'm going to talk a little bit sort of what's happening on the commercial building side. Mike shared some of the work in the division on the supers. We unfortunately don't have residential workers, which we did because it's just amazing some of the work that they have. So Building Skills Partnership again was born out of this labor management conversation. It really started around how do we improve the quality of life of janitors and service workers in the state of California. sort of in a more broad sense. And we did start over 10 years ago with a vocational ESL program, computer literacy, citizenship, some other life skills, helping our members who are vast majority Latino immigrants, provide an opportunity for their children in terms of educational access. So really looking at a comprehensive program in terms of educational access. In the same way that the Justice for Janitors model of organizing is comprehensive, we sort of took that same approach. The union also represents security officers, airport workers, and other service workers. And so as we were building this partnership, and the reason we decided to have it run out of a nonprofit versus a traditional Taft-Hartley is because in our industry, as you may know, is that building owners contract out the work to a private company. So that private company is the employer. But at the end of the day, who really makes these decisions and what's happening in these buildings and facilities are building owners. So we wanted to make sure that they were part of the conversation. And if we were fighting for improving quality of life of service workers, we also wanted the community. So we have a board of directors that includes employers, building owners, the Building Owner Managers Association, the union, and also community members so that we can address these issues. So that was a structure that we set up. In 2008, throughout the state of California, all of the master janitorial contracts negotiated a training fund. We were trying to follow what was happening in some of our other parts of the world. Whether it was a penny per hour per worker or 5 cents per hour per worker, we wanted something to start with to invest in training. But it was really that opportunity that gave us, through the board and through this labor management partnership and a win-win, with win-win goals, we were able to develop those relationships and that trust, similar to what Mike referenced, is after building all of that power and being able to leverage. How do we go beyond, what's normally in a regular collective bargaining agreement? We were able to build out a lot of different programs. And one of the conversations, one of the things that we were seeing is that more and more buildings in California were seeking the LEED system, right? The classification of sustainability under the U.S. Rebuilding Council. At the same time, we're seeing that workers' workload is increasing quite significantly, right? And some of it was due to, well, you don't have to use water anymore to mop the floor, so you don't have to squeeze the water, so you can clean more kitchens now because you don't have. I mean, it was just this really, crazy things that were happening in our industry. Green was coming in, our members were getting workload increases. So the union and through Building Skills Partnership, we partnered with our partners, with building owners, with the U.S. Rebuilding Council, and said, what can we do? What's next for us? We're doing vocational ESL, we're doing these other trainings. What are we going to do around green? So we also had some support as well from SEIU International to think about how we were going to approach this. And so the things that I want to highlight, when I explain the program, it really highlights the 3 areas that we've been hearing about today, which is equity, which is quality jobs, and also climate change and climate action. And so when we built the partnership with all of these stakeholders, we said, look, you're going after LEED certification because you want to be the sustainable buildings. But what about the janitors? The janitors work at night. They're ghost workers. They're the invisible workers, mostly immigrant workers. No one's really thinking like what janitors have to do with climate action. Well, when a building has their gold, silver, platinum seal in the building, that janitor should know that 14 out of the 40 points that building got has to do with the work that they do. And they should be valued for what they bring to the sustainability in that building. They should understand that connection. They should be seen. They should be heard. They should be at the table. They're the eyes and ears. They know the tenant practices. They know what vampire energy is being sucked out of the building that doesn't need to. Again, commercial office buildings are the biggest and have the biggest energy consumption also in the state of California. And we're looking at panels and door sensors and that sort of stuff, but what about workers? What about investing in workers? And how can we maximize all of those efforts? So the first angle we took is looking at valuing the work, creating quality job, and improving the services. If a worker doesn't understand and know how important it is that they report certain things or that they are proactive about waste diversion in other areas, I'll try to focus on energy efficiency for this panel. But the 30-hour training program. Workers take 2 exams. through the U.S. Green Building Council to get certified. The first exam actually qualifies the building to get an additional point towards your certification. So that's sort of like a carrot for the building owners to meet that requirement. The second exam, the final, certifies the actual worker, and they're learning about the leak. We're not teaching them how to clean, they know how to clean. We're talking about why are we using microfiber, what's happening to indoor air quality, what does the leak system look like, what does your work have to do with what we're trying to achieve, what is the impact on the world, what's happening in office buildings. So they're really becoming sort of environmentalists. So we're including best practices around waste diversion, energy efficiency, green cleaning, water conservation, and safety. And so those are the topics that we cover. We lined up the curriculum with matching the lead system. So that one, workers are being invested to improve their skills, but also addressing the changes that are already happening in their building. And if anybody's interested in more details about janitors are not just cleaning toilets, sweeping floors, and taking out the trash. There is a system to the work that they do. And so it's very important that you folks understand that. So we're really looking at upskilling the industry and then being recognized for the value that they provide, especially as the union advocates for higher wages. Looking at equity, again, janitors are often unseen, often not thought of. What happens when a building gets built? What happens to all the buildings that are already built? There's operations and maintenance, and there's a whole array of jobs in property services that have a lot to do with maintaining buildings. And again, you can invest in equipment, but if it's not being used appropriately, then you're not maximizing the efforts. The last on climate, we actually had a study done of our program. And building owners, we had a building owner who did a study of their own portfolio, Kilroy Realty, who did their whole portfolio in Southern California and saw 5.6% savings in energy after the program. Doesn't mean all energy efficiency falls on the shoulders of the janitors, but it's just one more thing that buildings can do that's inexpensive to be able to maximize the efforts that they're all doing. And so we did have an organization called CVLA that does pro bono work to consult and assess different sustainability efforts. And so they looked at our program and they found some of that same data and statistics comparing buildings that had been certified versus comparable buildings that had not, even if they were still in the LEED system, just demonstrating that this is sort of the easiest, cheapest thing. It's cheaper than putting a solar panel, right, to be able to maximize efforts. So I think it's important that we look at investing in the worker and how that makes that worker feel, bringing them to the table. One of the things that we've seen, and I'm just making the last point for this part of the presentation, is that over 80% of the workers that we certified, the first 700 workers that went through this program, say that they've made changes at home because they are getting it that deep. They're recycling water. They understand the difference between gray water and black water and what to do with it. They are making other changes with the light bulbs and other sustainability practices, and they're taking it to their families and to their kids. Their own utilities are going down. So we've really seen that if they're taking it at home, they're definitely really learning and being able to implement within what their role is, being able to implement at their sites. So we've now certified close to 900 workers in the state of California, and we're still expanding and looking at going into, we just finished our first certification and graduation at YouTube, which is part of the Google facility. So looking at the high-tech and biotech companies in Silicon Valley, in addition to all of our urban centers and large commercial office buildings.
Thank you. There's such inspiring examples of in a lot of cases, work that started out really. I'm going off script, guys. I'm not asking any member questions.
Script is good.
So listen carefully. The examples that have started at a local level and in some cases stayed there. It seems to me as if, at least in the two examples that John and Mike described, that it really took some visionary leadership and then partnership development at the local level. And I just wondered if you could walk through kind of the nuts and bolts of that early stage work and some of the challenges with that. And also then the second part of it is sort of what gets in the way of scaling that geographically.
Well, you actually need a little history on our local. So our local was, third to BJ, local I was president, was trustee by the international because of corruption in the local and in the industry. And at the time that I took over the local was losing density in the city. The village was going down. The industry believed that they could take the industry down. And major buildings in the city were going from union to non-union. When people lost their job, they went from middle class life with a pension and healthcare to nothing, literally poverty. So people would lose their job, have to move out of their apartment, move their family, and move in with relatives in many cases. So we started out with a contentious relationship with the employers, and it took a series of near strikes in the city over a period of 3 years, 3 contracts, almost 9 years, to build a different kind of relationship. And each time we would go into negotiations, we would say to them, we want to work with you, we want to be partners with you, and they would, in effect, refuse to talk to us. And we had to build political clout in the city, use our political clout to stop buildings from being built, stop them from getting financing, make the employers understand that the union was a group to be reckoned with before they would actually sit down and talk to us. And I can remember one specific time, some of you might have been at the conference yesterday on pensions, a company called Related in New York, that the construction trades are fighting with. The mayor, who we had helped to support in Bloomberg, brought the owner of the company, Steve Ross, into the room and made him sit there with the leadership and us, me, and a couple of the other officers, and make a deal with us. And it was because of our political strength. So that was a major factor. And I'd say the second thing is that we made our members, our workers' lives real to the owners. When we would go into bargaining, we would bring 1,200 members to the table, sitting behind us, all our stewards. And we would have a membership committee of maybe 50 or 60 people. And we would bring the community groups in with us. So pastors from the churches, community leaders, and have them sit at the table. So I would say, to my earlier comment, that the transition was from you're our enemy and they wanted to get rid of us and lower the wages and take away the health care, to we should do things together. And once we got to that point, then it was only a question about what. And the two things we really worked on were security, because of 9/11. We developed joint programs on building security and terrorist watch, both in the commercial and the residential sector. And then the second was greening of the buildings. And I think to Aida's point, the industry was starting to move towards the LEED certification and the value of that, which really meant money for them. They would get subsidies or breaks, tax breaks. We became a partner in helping them do that. And then for our members, it was the transition from we're going to fight with the boss to we can cooperate on certain things. And our training program became a dramatic center for cooperation. So we would have a graduation every year. We graduated about 1,800 people from our schools. And the employers were all come. We had a residential worker of the year, commercial janitor of the year award. It was a big deal. The employers would come, be very thankful for the presentation, and part of it dramatically changed. But it was all about changing the power dynamics, political power, really.
I'm glad you introduced that. So I'm going to come at it slightly differently, but I mean, the foundation of what you've said is absolutely crucial to this. For us, it was about crisis opportunity. If everybody in work And I'd gone to the leadership of the building trades and said, hey, there's this great, green thing going on. They said, well, that's interesting, but I want to keep on doing what works right now and what, takes the dues in and keeps density. But because there was a crisis, then people were looking for other solutions. We were building on something that's significantly different from our history as a labor movement in Canada. And right from our start, our labor council is from 1871. So we've been working for justice for 147 years. And that started with economic and social justice. After the Second World War, we did a huge amount of work on racial justice. And in the last 20 years, it's included climate justice. And again, so many of our members who've come from elsewhere in the world, their families are still back home in global south countries that are being devastated by climate, extreme weather events and other things. So it's real for them. But even in the building trades, we had in Toronto back then, and it's lessened since because of other things, we had a core of leadership who firmly believed that our movement, we were social unions. We weren't just union advantage, we'll keep healthcare to ourselves, so that's a union advantage, we'll keep this. We believe in our soul, what we win for ourselves, we want for all Canadians. And so going in and talking about environmental considerations wasn't talking Greek or Macedonian to people. It was already part of our vocabulary that this stuff fits within our mandate as a trade union movement. But it often comes down to individuals. And we're very lucky. We have a Social Democratic Party in Canada that's formally part of our labor movement. The New Democratic Party is called. And the guy who became the leader of that, Jack Lee, was also a green visionary. And I would sit at his dining table as he brought developers and engineers and architects around, breaking bread, talking about why not green buildings and what could the city do to make that more real. How does that work? And this engineer has just come up with a building that would be, 103% more less electricity than a standard building. 103%. How do you do that? Well, that's about cogen inside a building. So when you have, individuals who are catalysts, and I think in our movement we've recognized that. So often our strongest moments are, inspired leadership with a huge base, stepping up to take on these struggles. That was it. And the last piece is, though, we wouldn't have had the credibility to pull that off and the trust without the power relationship. And we also had put together in facing this recession, unlike most other parts of North America where the building trades unions retreated to the high ground, the big jobs they could defend, the big commercial and industrial jobs, we went and organized. We put together multi-union organizing crews into the housing, into the residential, to light commercial. And we came out of that the highest level of unionization in North America in the trades, and still are in Toronto, than anywhere else in this country, in North America. And so our leaders and the stewards and others had a degree of trust in us as a collective, that when we said this is a worthwhile place to go, they'd already been battle tested and hardened and understood that we trusted each other on this journey, and if it was going to be a bit different, well, and hell, we just took on this other thing, and that was a bit different, a little bit risky, so why not do this? Because it doesn't seem like it's going to hurt compared to some of the other stuff, battles we've been into. So it does come back to power in order to take advantage of some of the great opportunities or ideas or individual leadership that is on offer when you're trying to address something like climate change.
So Dion, the trades who have work and efficiency have been part of building a broader coalition to advocate within the CPUC. And so in a way it's a slightly different power dynamic. Can you talk a little bit about how that's worked and to what effect? And I think there was a proposed decision that's pretty promising, so maybe you could talk about that too.
Well, first of all, as far as relationships are concerned, we're pretty lucky in California to have good relationships with elected officials. That has a lot. That means a lot, right? Because when it comes about trying to propose things, and we have people that we can talk to and that understand our issues. But also with our coalitions and relationships with our contractors associations, we're pretty lucky about that too, because definitely we have negotiation issues where we have some contentious back and forth that goes on, but outside of that, we have people that are outside of that negotiation, and we actually can work on things together with climate issues and/or anything that that we can see eye to eye on. Now, we don't always see eye to eye with our contractors, but we for certain we communicate and we talk about specifically the things that we can move forward on, and energy efficiency certainly is one. As far as the other coalitions, when it comes to the California Public Utilities Commission, I think the California Energy Efficiency Industry Council, we pretty much work together with other stakeholders, which is the electricians. Their NECA is their contractors association, much like our SMAC is our contractors association, and then also the electricians, pipe fitters associations, and we all come together along with Blue Green Alliance, NRDC, and all of the other stakeholders within California to try to propose good process and language when it comes to workforce, a qualified workforce, and even the disadvantaged communities. So recently, a proposed decision, and they've actually proposed a decision on the California Public Utilities Commission. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom. This is the workforce standards have been put back into the ratepayer subsidy programs, as well as disadvantaged communities programs as well too. So.
Yeah, correct. It's on Friday the Public Utility Commission issued a proposed decision to require certain workforce standards for the energy efficiency programs. The Public Utilities Commission there's about $1 billion in ratepayer money that goes toward energy efficiency programs in California, which creates a multi-billion-dollar economy. Currently, there are no workforce standards attached to that work. As a result, it's low-wage jobs and you're not getting the energy efficiency that they're claiming because the work's not being done right. So now they're requiring new programs to look at workforce standards, and they have proposals for specific requirements for lighting controls and HVAC. Right now, it's just on the non-residential, but that needs to be moved to residential as well. The standards they're proposing aren't perfect, but they're starting to move in the right direction.
Well, again, as far as apprenticeship programs and training for the workforce and things that just for the community itself that we work for, and also trying to get local hire as well. So advocating all that. Again, in California, it works really well. And again, it's a continuous thing. You have to be there though, 100% of the time. So we're very lucky. I would say we're very lucky, even though it doesn't always go our way. For the unions as well, sometimes it just goes away. It goes good for the industry, which is we're very concerned about as well too. So,
yeah, but
equal playing field.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just some commentary. I think that having to be there 100% of the time is incredibly expensive and resource intensive, especially when you need legal counsel to draft to intervene in the regulatory proceedings.
Love our legal counsel.
And it's been, it's really been years and years. The CPUC in California has spent about over $1 million on studies to study this issue, and then didn't adopt recommendations. And then it was really putting together a coalition, getting the buy-in of the Sierra Club and EJ groups and NRDC and everybody on the same page, pushing for these standards for really years and years and years, and then proposed decisions come out and then they go away, and so it's just been an enormous effort. Did you have a comment on that?
No, I was just gonna, so you said apprenticeship, training, what are some of the others?
The standards that were adopted, that were proposed Friday?
Yeah.
Tom,
So on HVAC, they're requiring certain size projects to use a qualified workforce, and they define it in a number of ways, and to include apprenticeship graduates and apprentices. It also provides for people who have a certain number of years of experience and are demonstrating their competency. That's the part that's vague. They don't explain how someone demonstrates they can do the work, and so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure it's actually a meaningful standard, but that's the fight.
And the standard, if I may say, just the standard isn't necessarily specifically just a union standard. It's actually just advocating for a state approved apprenticeship program through Department of Apprenticeships. So it's not like we're saying, I would love to be able to say, hey, you only that I can hire union workers, but as far as industry is concerned, we're also concerned about making that, because, I hate to even say underground economy, because that's a whole new, bucket right there, but that's huge. That's huge when it comes to workforce standards and when it comes to permits and when it comes to, we can talk all about that too.
So there's different models here. One, in the case of Toronto, getting this $12 million revolving loan fund, with infrastructure dollars to support this. In California, the trying to attach standards to this, $1 billion+ of public, quasi-public money that was spent a year on this stuff has been a really laborious battle. And then Aida, in the case of your program, the partnership with USGBC, which is, LEED certification, I think, unless I'm really outdated, is a voluntary green building certification. And so that's really been just a very voluntary partnership, but it is having an impact in the market, almost in a similar way that a regulation would, because LEED is so popular. So could you just tell us a little bit more about, why did how did USGBC see the value in this, and how did that evolve over time?
So on the first part, with more and more buildings going towards the LEED system, there's sort of a mix, right? Some of it is there are facilities who want to be responsible to the environment, and then there's some folks, or a mixture thereof, where there's also increased rental rates for LEED certified buildings, and that's really a huge incentive, because there's tenants who are more aware, who are maybe more progressive or more concerned, and when they're looking to rent a floor, or rent some office space, that's part of what's being sold to them as a tenant. So you're paying for sustainability, we're reducing carbon footprint, we have all these other bells and whistles to help with that, and so they're getting more money, and so there's a combination of things I think that have been happening between folks really wanting to sort of be part of the solution and make changes in their buildings. There's also incentives that they're already taking advantage of and doing in their buildings. So if they're already sort of becoming more energy efficient, then why not sort of go after all these things? So I couldn't tell you, I'm not in those rooms, but that's sort of what we've seen, and then just saw, there's thousands of buildings every year that come onto the LEED system in the state of California. So we were seeing this, and we were seeing that the work was impacted. I started working with the industry 21 years ago and working with janitors. And I remember the first time about 20 years ago when, the chemicals were changed and the impact that it had. And the chemicals have come a long way since then, but it was an issue. It was an issue for workers. Because that's, that was their equipment and their tools, and they didn't like them, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So there's that part of it, and then the second part of your question was why USGBC would be interested. It was really a learning process for us to understand what they're trying to achieve, and their mission is to address issues, that are, of sustainability. And so it just makes sense. It's like, why haven't we, they certify engineers, they certify architects, they certify buildings, and why wouldn't you certify a janitor? And so it was really an educational process for them to see the work and it was pretty easy. Like once you break down the work that the janitor does, and I think we did this joint study, sort of analysis actually was led out at the 32 EJ local, because we've always collaborated and partnered together, where they looked at what can a super do, what can a janitor in a commercial office building do, what can different classifications, where are their touching points, what can they do that's going to save energy, what can they do that's going to divert waste, all these different points. And so we learned through that, and we're able to sit down with USGBC and say, so where does this match in the LEED system, and what should a worker know, and what's the language that folks are using for that. So for them, it's been a really good partnership. We started working with the chapter in Los Angeles. that's really sort of taken over like the region and work throughout the state also now, and the leadership there. And then there was also the work that SCIU as an international was doing, sort of parallel to us. We were developing the program and kind of like pre that, as we were all looking at sustainability, where they were working with the National USB Building Council around this point system. So you have points for the chemical that you use, you have points if you have public transportation near your building, and there's all these around, you know, the service workers, but nothing around training, nothing around worker training. At the same time, USGBC is looking on their end saying, well, you know, we're giving these certifications because they bought this equipment and an HVAC system, but then if they're not using it or they're not, workers aren't being trained to use it, then are we really maximizing? So they were really open to the idea of including this pilot training in operations and maintenance that counted worker training. And so that got in there, and so we were able to also use that as we started developing the pilot and say, look, if you do the program, you also get this additional point. And I'll tell you, it's not a whole lot of buildings that are saying, oh, it's a good incentive, but that's not the only reason they're doing it. Because the buildings that wanted to do it in pilot are doing it because they want to do, you know, they want to be doing the next step. I remember, I'll just share this real quick story. I remember when we were first doing the pilot, we were marketing with one of the property managers, and they were debating, they're like, well, 30 hours unpaid time times, you know, I got 25 workers, that's, and doing the numbers, right, how much that costs, you know, and in the same sort of conversation says, I can't believe the building down the street just put up X number of new solar panels, and now they're going to get platinum status, so I'm ordering new solar panels, and we're going to, you know, we want to be here the next. I'm like, you're sitting here counting how much you got to pay workers to be in a training to benefit your building, but like this, you put on the solar panels, you're competing with the next step. So those are things that we've sort of picked up on and figure out how, you know, as with our sort of, you know, part of a union, we organize, right? So we have to talk to, you know, to the right people and understand where they're coming from, but that's, you know, but the USGBC has been very open in understanding, and also, you know, they've had folks who reach out to them, or even to us directly, but to them saying, oh, we want our janitors to be certified in our building, and so we've sort of worked with them to understand that we won't go to their building if these are not responsible contractors signed on to the collective bargaining agreement. So even them being able to sort of send that message back, I think helps. Like, no, we have to set a standard. If you don't have a standard of wages and benefits, then you don't get to say that you did something good by the workers.
Questions from the audience. Let's open it up and see what is on the minds. After lunch, talking about the energy efficiency.
So when you opened this, you're talking about some of the apparent conflict between worker standards and some of these other policy objectives, and I'm thinking specifically about the Public Utilities Commission and energy efficiency, and there is this conflict between standards and some of these other drivers. So how do you, like, what are the levers there? How can you influence and change that? Like, what are some effective strategies for that?
Could you just introduce yourself?
I'm Julia Hatton, I'm with Rising Sun Energy Center.
I didn't catch your word.
I'm Julia, I'm with Rising Sun, we're a local nonprofit.
So the question is, how do you balance competing interests or priorities around energy efficiency with the Public Utility Commission?
Well, just like what are the levers to see? What we're finding is that there are, you know, there will be language in proposed decisions and things like that talk about workforce standards, but then there are also guidelines and policies that are in direct opposition to that, where they're really saying, actually, the only thing that's important is cost. And so how do you navigate that when there are these two things that are true?
Do you want me to say a little bit about that? I can take a little bit of that. First of all, if you find out, let us know. Okay? We'll take it. You can get my card, and we're going to be talking after this. You know, that's a difficult animal. It's always the lesser of the two that they want, right? It's always the price that it goes to. And the reality of it is that if there's a price difference, chances are our contractors, they get a lot of this work too, right? And the other contractors that get this work, Did they really bid that much underneath us? What are they doing with all that money? And are they really going after the workforce training and actually providing that investment to their employees? So we have to fight that all the time, and we're continuously language after language and changing language and trying to do whatever we can to speak to whoever we can that understands that. A contractor that's willing to pay less, to be honest with you, on some of this work, isn't going to do the job. Isn't going to do the job right. And or if he is willing to do the job that much, then there's something cutting corners here somewhere, whether it be permitting or whatever it may be. So we have to continually change language and go after those, because to me that's just not right.
I might just briefly respond to that, if I may. The cost benefit test, it's costs on paper and benefits on paper, and we know that there's a gap between the savings we think we're getting on paper and what is actually happening in reality. So that's one thing. There's solutions proposed, like actually measure the savings that you're getting and have more performance-based incentives. And that would probably help support a more skilled workforce, because at some point we would actually be measuring what we're getting and tying it to incentives, and that doesn't currently happen very much at all. And third, we have these savings goals, and when equipment is not installed properly, it doesn't just hurt that particular project, it kills market transformation, which is a high priority goal in California. How do you animate the market and get consumers to want to invest in energy efficiency? If it doesn't work, like there's so many jokes around lighting controls not working. There's comic strip after comic strip. It's a joke. If the equipment is a joke because it's not installed properly, then the chances of getting the market to adopt that on its own is killed for probably a generation. And so there's a serious cost of foregone savings that are not accounted for by not engaging a more skilled workforce and paying what it might require. So,
Can I add just a little bit just on that? Is, when things aren't installed correctly, it does affect that building for today and tomorrow, but it affects whoever's in that building as well too, because whether it be as HVAC systems, right? You're not getting the right air conditioning distributed to the right places, but also sometimes fresh air. They found, some of the fresh air intakes and or all the things that make you, the building, work. So exhaust air when it comes to stairwell pressurization. There's all kinds of things that people don't know, and I think it's just education to whoever it is.
Michael, did you want to respond to that?
I just want to weigh in on this one piece, which I know from my building trades experience is always controversial, but the truth of the matter is that you can always get somebody to do something cheaper, and they can still do it well in many cases. So in our country, California rates are much higher than Texas rates. Plus more to put something in New York. It doesn't mean that people are more or less skilled. It's about what the society will support. And they was talking about this morning about Norway and the social compact. If we don't have that in this country, if we don't have the political power, I kind of come back to this, then we will not be able to get the right skills for the right job at the right cost, because the society won't support it. And there's a great article in the New York Times yesterday that said 50% of workers in this country are now working at minimum wage or below. 50% in the U.S. Because they're working, casual jobs or just not being paid that much. And in skilled, Aida's talking about janitors making more money or getting treated well or having more skills. In New York, our janitors, commercial janitors, are making almost $25, $30 an hour, but they could be replaced tomorrow with somebody who could do the same job for $7 an hour. And they're not being paid $30 because they're more skilled than a non-union janitor paying $7. It's because we won't allow it to happen because we have the strength to hold the rate. And I think in the construction trades, we have this conversation in my old days all the time about, well, the non-union guys can't do the work. Well, they can. People can be paid, trained, and be skilled and paid less if the society will support it. And the only way for us to win those things is to have the political power to do it. That's it. It's not beyond that.
Yeah. All right. Other
Fighting for. And it really is to all of our benefit. I find as an American, always looking to our northern neighbors for inspiration on the big ideas and the leads. And Betony, in your opening comments there, you talked about the nuts and bolts of compliance and follow-up on some of these policies and labor standards to assure that they're happening. And those are the critical details that outfits like the UC Berkeley Labor Center, UCLA Labor Center, different independent research groups bring as ammunition for us in the trades. Oh, Betony, IBW, Local 595. And we're out there with the sheet metal guys and, trying to implement the sorts of policies that we're all talking about here. And I recall my first service call for a lighting control panel in the late 90s was this fancy digital board, and they complained it wasn't working. And so I show up and I open the glass door and I open it up, and the panel is blinking and everything, but none of the wires are on the screws. They're all just wire netted together in the back of the can. Because they couldn't figure out how to make the damn thing work, so they just turned the lights on and left, and so the local switches turned them on and off. That's exactly the kind of stuff that we need to have compliance, acceptance testing by people that are trained and skilled to confirm that this stuff has been installed properly. And it goes to LEED certifications. The janitors I found were our best friends in the buildings, helping us do late night work and upskilling these people to be able to conduct themselves professionally and make our lives go smoother is so critical. I'm just really feel very humbled and grateful to have worked with a lot of people in your industries. That was kind of my comment.
Great, thank you. And then in the back corner,
Hi, I'm Pam Wallace. I'm with the Best Center Building Efficiency for a Sustainable Tomorrow. We're a national center funded by the National Science Foundation to help community colleges throughout the U.S. establish programs in building technician education. So my question is, installation is one thing. I've seen tons of installations done well, but once they leave, you got people overriding these systems because they really don't know how to operate them. So what are some of the standards that you guys are doing, or what are you doing with respect to, I guess, enforcing, requiring more training so that we can upskill the technicians that are here to operate these intelligent, smart buildings, so they will be optimizing the energy efficiency and performance.
and you're talking about, did you say you work with the community colleges in specifically? Anybody have any ideas about that?
So you're putting in standards for installation, but now what are the
And
standards?
you kind of missed the presentations, right? So they actually talked about.
Yeah, so just on this training aspect of it, I know that in the state of California, they require the commissioning of a building, so they come down and make sure everything's done, make sure everything's working correctly, they go through every little nut and bolt and everything, that's what it is, and then they hand over the paperwork, right? And then from there, the building maintenance people, if they come from sheet metal workers, right, they already have been trained and or understand the units, the service people that are typically, somebody comes from either the sheet metal workers, service departments, and may go into, hey, this is my job as building maintenance now, and we're gonna continue on with this building. So, for us, I would have to say the training portion of it is the continuous investment in the training, and same thing with the electricians and carpenters and all the other trades. It's a continuous training of those. Now, when a building maintenance person comes from outside the trade and doesn't have the training, then that's exactly what you'll see. You'll see a person that doesn't understand the building and or or doesn't have the resources, right? He doesn't have those correct resources to go to somebody that says, hey, I understand this. One thing about our apprenticeship program is a continuous resource for them for the rest of their career. And they have a continuous education program that if I lost my job today as a Western City Council guy, I can go back and learn how to weld, I can learn how to, do all the other stuff that, within my industry. So,
Yeah, and then you, yeah. a
Oh,
question
yeah.
there.
Sorry, I made this part of the presentation, but I guess my question was, back to the installation. Has there ever been exploration discussion around like co-enforcement or like a community enforcement of some of the compliance component? So like in which that we see like some public agencies explore, like unions doing, verifying the certified payroll, but, trying to see a confluence of different unions and community groups that would have that technical expertise that, ensure compliance on the permitting side. I don't know if this has been an exploration, especially in HVAC.
In HVAC, I know that our local chapters each have their organizing department that specifically do that. They go out and they're making sure that either compliance or licensed contractors, sometimes they have to talk to the workers that are off the job site, they have to go through, they do their investigations, do that, so.
Were you going to comment on that?
I was going to comment on that. Just that, in California, in HVAC, for example, on lighting controls, there are acceptance test requirements under energy code, and there's now required that the people who do the acceptance testing are trained, certified. I mean, this all comes down to training. The problem, of course, of enforcement is that the acceptance test requirements, recent reports have shown like 30% of the jurisdictions in California building departments don't enforce acceptance test requirements. And even in the jurisdictions where they do, we hear from contractors all the time, acceptance testers say they got the job and then the contractor heard that the building inspector doesn't require it, so then they didn't do the work. So it's enforcement and compliance go together, but everything really comes down to training. You need trained people to do this stuff, and that's where we come back to the unions and apprenticeship programs.
So I actually want to pick up on the last two comments, because when I was in Paris at the COP21, I spent a lot of time in the industry expos, like watching what companies and others were talking about over there. Europe is 10 years ahead of us. I mean, we are starting to build net zero buildings, barely. 3 years ago, they had cities, municipalities, and companies talking about having already built entire net zero communities, and they were already functioning because they had not only the design expertise, but also the ability of people who are operating and maintaining those places to be net zero. So we need to take our aspirations and imagine where we got to get to, starting from some of the good stories we've had and we've shared today, but thinking about this thing just ramping up to an entire different level of performance, of design, and integrating within that an equity agenda that firmly says if we're going to have, and I think for me, one of the most important pieces of Rich Trunca's comments today was connecting the need for a climate justice agenda by labor and community together to be able to challenge the rise of the right and the haters in our world. Because we just elected a Trump guy in Ontario. We thought we were way smarter than you all. and we got somebody who's, all of my parties' legislators were thrown out of the legislature today after hundreds of people were pulled out in handcuffs fighting around just basic democratic rights. So we also have seen, the rise of the right across this world, against refugees. Most of them are climate refugees, for God's sakes.
Right.
So if we imagine the journey we want to be on, and I've talked about our 147-year journey and those before that, but if we imagine the journey we want to be on, we're very clear about the kind of society and world we want to build. And then we take the technologies and we take the human endeavor that is so natural in people that want to make something better life for themselves and their family and their communities, and we weave that together in a very powerful narrative. Skills are part of it, power is a crucial part of it, but so is the dream that we share of a better planet. And I think that having the language and the vocabulary that is seamless will allow us to prevail against some really nasty-ass opposition, economic power that wants to roll this stuff back, folks that want to divide us based on, place of origin, religion, color of our skin, all of that stuff. And so I think that the whole thinking about we're moving to net zero communities also tells us the aspiration we're thinking about.
I think, do you want to follow up? Because that's
He was so
that's
good. and your question about how do you get these things done, I would call it tenant demand, but it's really what John was talking about. If the environmental activists demand good jobs and good wages, it will make a difference. Because what does LEED certification mean? It means that the tenants want to move into that building. That's why they do it. Same with residential. It's the tenants who are coming in and want to be in a building that has good water, good sunshine, clean building, good filtration for their kids. And that's why this training was acceptable in the residential sector. So this marriage of the environmental and the jobs community, union community, which is, the union community is very small, so job community is much bigger, is the right thing to go. And then my last comment would be, I'm an accidental environmental activist. I came to this late. I was chairing a committee, we call it the 21st Century Committee in SEIU, that was looking at the future, and it was looking at the global future. And we started out asking ourselves, what's contributing to inequality? And we looked at technology. We went to the Institute of the Future out here, Palo Alto, and we got their, best thinking on what's going to happen with technology. And then we came to climate. And all of us on the committee, 20 of the biggest locals in SEIU, sitting there together, said, well, it's kind of a waste of time. So it's sort of a secondary issue. And then we looked at what was happening around the world and how inequality was growing. And a piece of inequality was a very basic thing, that if you were poor, you were going to have bad water and bad air. And that means your kids are going to be sick, and that means you're going to have live in poverty, and you will die. And it became evident quickly that on our list, we should take climate from the bottom and put it at the top. Because when you have inequality and you don't have the basics, good water, good air, you are not going to live. And there are going to be a few people at the top who will. And that's what made me a climate activist, not a theoretical discussion, but this very fundamental. People were dying in the Philippines because of the typhoon. People in Japan, people in our country, people in St. Louis, they tracked them on their inhalers, and the kids in the poor community were using their inhalers in certain areas that was all the poor communities. It was not in a place where there was wealth. And it's just like your hill, for those who are staying at the top of the hill at the Fairmont, like John. They were living at the top because the sewer was at the bottom. And that's where working people are going to be if we don't do something about climate. And so that's what I would say. I'm here today because of that, and I appreciate all of you being here for the same reason.
So I would say that for the young activists that are here, or for anybody else, the trades have long time tried to promote the proper installations of their craft, right? And through this process, the sheet metal workers and or the piping and or whoever it may be have developed this code, right? This code, the standards that we have today. And from that code and from the proper installations of everything working efficiently came the energy efficiency movement, I think, is where it came from. So kind of keep in mind and keep that in mind when you're advocating for things. You want the proper installation. You want an air conditioning unit that says it's going to do this much efficiency. Once they put the ductwork on it, once they do everything beyond that, it still has to maintain that efficiency. So the importance of the education for somebody to make sure that the duct sizing and all these things are done, there's a lot more to it. So if you don't know about it, then, my card's right here. I'm in California, and if there's anything we can ever do for you, please reach out, because it's that important to our industry that we've been doing it for years. Thank you very much for being here.
I think everything's been said. I think the only thing sort of kind of on my radar, based on the question that was asked a little bit earlier, is thinking about, because I know we're looking at it in our industry, is labor also coming together to figure out, sometimes we're in the same places, but we have like all these different unions, right? And we're not sort of, collaborating or speaking to each other. And, we're looking at, how do we build career paths? Like, how does a janitor become a maintenance person? How does a janitor do utility engineering and change a light bulb? And so how career paths, we were so compartmentalized, and I think that in the same way that we can upskill industries, create career paths, we can also collaborate together on these initiatives, right, to be seen as a valuable asset to a building owner. So many of us sort of, that building owner relationship, and looking to what Mike referenced in terms of the dynamic of power is absolutely key. I mean, that's the only way we were able, to build what we built is after, decades of fighting the streets and janitors wanting a voice and fighting for civility and fighting for density, to finally be able to say, okay, we're done fighting. Well, not done fighting, but okay, we're tired of fighting. Can we find some common things that's going to be an added value to both sides? And that wouldn't have been created had it not been for that. So I can only imagine what we could do if we really collaborated, as labor and the environmental movement to look at what we can do in buildings at least.
Great, thank you all for being here.